Hi, everyone. Today we are going to be reading together The Life You Save May Be Your Own by Flannery O'Connor. Our directions today, we are going to read the first part of this story. It's a two-part story, and we've split it in half right at the page break. So we'll read the first part of the story, or you're listening along right now, and we will complete the chart in our Google Classroom. When we finish, we'll also go ahead and fill out the exit ticket for our reading. So let's begin. This is part one of The Life You Save May Be Your Own by Flannery O'Connor. The old woman and her daughter were sitting on their porch when Mr. Shiflet came up their road for the first time. The old woman slid to the edge of her chair and leaned forward, shading her eyes from the piercing sunset with her hand. The daughter could not see far in front of her and continued to play with her fingers. Although the old woman lived in this desolate spot with only her daughter, and she had never seen Mr. Shiflet before, she could tell, even from a distance, that he was a tramp and no one to be afraid of. His left coat sleeve was folded up to show there was only half an arm in it, and his gaunt figure listed slightly to the side, as if the breeze were pushing him. He had on a black town suit and a brown felt hat that was turned up in the front and down in the back, and he carried in a tin toolbox by a handle. He came on at an amble, up her road, his face turned toward the sun, which appeared to be bowing itself on the peak of a small mountain. The old woman didn't change her position until he was almost into her yard. Then she rose with one hand fisted on her hip. The daughter, a large girl in a short blue organdy dress, saw him all at once and jumped up and began to stamp and point and make excited, speechless sounds. Mr. Shiflet stopped just inside the yard and set his box on the ground and tipped his hat at her as if she were not in the least afflicted. Then he turned toward the old woman and swung the hat all the way off. He had long, black, slick hair that hung flat from a part in the middle to be on the tips of his ears on either side. His face descended in forehead for more than half its length and ended suddenly with his features just balanced over a jutting steel trap jaw. He seemed to be a young man, but he had a look of composed dissatisfaction, as if he understood life thoroughly. "Good evening," the old woman said. She was about the size of a cedar fence post, and she had a man's gray hat pulled down low over her head. The tramp stood looking at her and didn't answer. He turned his back and faced the sunset. He swung both his whole and his short arm up slowly so that they indicated an expanse of sky, and his figure formed a crooked cross. The old woman watched him with her arms folded across her chest as if she were the owner of the sun, and the daughter watched, her head thrust forward and her fat, helpless hands hanging at the wrists. She had long pink gold hair and eyes as blue as a peacock's neck. He held the pose for almost 50 seconds, and then he picked up his box and came onto the porch and dropped down on the bottom step. "Lady," he said in a firm nasal voice, "I'd give a fortune to live where I could see me a sun do that every evening." "Does it every evening," the old woman said, and sat back down. The daughter sat down too, and watched him with a cautious, sly look, as if he were a bird that had come up very close. He leaned to one side, rooting in his pants pocket, and in a second he brought out a package of chewing gum and offered her a piece. She took it and unpeeled it and began to chew without taking her eyes off him. He offered the old woman a piece, but she only raised her upper lip to indicate she had no teeth. Mr. Shiflet's pale, sharp glance had already passed over everything in the yard, the pump near the corner of the house, and the big fig tree that 3 or 4 chickens were preparing to roost in, and had moved to a shed where he saw the square, rusted back of an automobile. "You ladies drive?" he asked. "That car ain't run in 15 years," the old woman said. "The day my husband died, it quit running." "Nothing is like it used to be, lady," he said. "The world is almost rotten." "That's right," the old woman said. "You from around here?" "Named Tom T. Shiftlett," he murmured, looking at the tires. "I'm pleased to meet you," the old woman said. "Name Lucy Nell Crater, and daughter Lucy Nell Crater. What you doing around here, Mr. Shiftlett?" He judged the car to be about a 1928 or 29 Ford. "Lady," he said, and turned and gave her his full attention, "let me tell you something. There's one of these doctors in Atlanta that's taken a knife and cut the human heart. The human heart," he repeated, leaning forward, "out of a man's chest, and held it in his hand." And he held his hand out, palm up, as if it were slightly weighted with the human heart, and studied it like it was a day-old chicken. "And lady," he said, allowing a long, significant pause in which his head slid forward and his clay-colored eyes brightened, "he don't know more about it than you or me." "That's right," the old woman said. "Why, if he was to take that knife and cut into every corner of it, he still wouldn't know no more than you or me. What you want to bet?" "Nothing," the old woman said wisely. "Where you come from, Mr. Shiftlett?" He didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and brought out a sack of tobacco and a package of cigarette papers, and rolled himself a cigarette expertly with one hand, and attached it in a hanging position to his upper lip. Then he took a box of wooden matches from his pocket and struck one on his shoe. He held the burning match as if he were studying the mystery of flame while it traveled dangerously toward his skin. The daughter began to make loud noises and to point to his hand and shake her finger at him. But when the flame was just before touching him, he leaned down with his hand cupped over it, as if he were going to set fire to his nose, and lit the cigarette. He flipped away the dead match and blew a stream of gray into the evening. A sly look came over his face. "Lady," he said, "nowadays people'll do anything anyways. I can tell you my name is Tom T. Shiftlett, and I come from Tarwater, Tennessee, but you never have seen me before. How you know I ain't lying? How you know my name ain't Aaron Sparks, lady, and I come from Singleberry, Georgia? Or how you know it's not George Speeds and I come from Lucy, Alabama? Or how you know I ain't Thompson Bright from Tallulah Falls, Mississippi?" "I don't know nothing about you," the old woman muttered, irked. "Lady," he said, "people don't care how they lie. Maybe the best I can tell you is, I'm a man. But listen, lady," he said, and paused and made his tone more ominous still. "What is a man?" The old woman began to gum a seed. "What do you carry in that tin box, Mr. Shiftlett?" she asked. "Tools," he said, put back. "I'm a carpenter." "Well, if you come out here to work, I'll be able to feed you and give you a place to sleep, but I can't pay. I'll tell you that before you begin," she said. There was no answer at once and no particular expression on his face. He leaned back against the 2x4 that helped support the porch roof. "Lady," he said slowly, "there's some men that some things mean more to them than money." The old woman rocked without comment, and the daughter watched the trigger that moved up and down in his neck. He told the old woman then that all most people were interested in was money. But he asked what a man was made for. He asked her if a man was made for money or what. He asked her what she thought she was made for, but she didn't answer. She only sat rocking and wondered if a one-armed man could put a new roof on her garden house. He asked a lot of questions that she didn't answer. He told her that he was 28 years old and had lived a varied life. He had been a gospel singer, a foreman on the railroad, an assistant in an undertaking parlor, and he had come over the radio for 3 months with Uncle Roy and his Red Creek Wranglers. He said he had fought and bled in the armed service of his country and visited every foreign land, and that everywhere he had seen people that didn't care if they did a thing one way or another. He said he hadn't been raised that way. A fat yellow moon appeared in the branches of the fig tree, as if it were going to roost there with the chickens. He said that a man had to escape to the country to see the world whole, and that he wished he lived in a desolate place like this, where you could see the sun go down every evening like God made it to do. "Are you married or are you single?" the old woman asked. There was a long silence. "Lady," he asked finally, "where would you find an innocent woman today? I wouldn't have any of this trash I could just pick up." The daughter was leaning very far down, hanging her head almost between her knees, watching him through a triangular door she had made in her overturned hair, and she suddenly fell in a heap on the floor and began to whimper. Mr. Shiplet straightened her out and helped her back in the chair. "Is she your baby girl?" he asked. "My only," the old woman said, "and she's the sweetest girl in the world. I wouldn't give her up for nothing on earth. She's smart, too. She can sweep the floor, cook, wash, feed the chickens, and hoe. I wouldn't give her up for a casket of jewels." "Nope," he said kindly. "Don't ever let any man take her away from you." "Any man come after her," the old woman said, "have to stay around the place." Mr. Shiplet's eye in the darkness was focused on a part of the automobile bumper that glittered in the distance. "Lady," he said, jerking his short arm up as if he could point with it to her house and yard and pump, "there ain't a broken thing on this plantation that I couldn't fix for you. One-armed jackleg or not, I'm a man," he said with a sullen dignity. "Even if I ain't a whole one, I got," he said, tapping his knuckles on the floor to emphasize the immensity of what he was going to say, "a moral intelligence." And his face pierced out of the darkness into a shaft of doorlight, and he stared at her as if he were astonished himself at this impossible truth. The old woman was not impressed with the phrase. "I told you you could hang around and work for food," she said, "if you don't mind sleeping in that car yonder." "Why, listen, lady," he said with a grin of delight. "The monks of old slept in their coffins." "They wasn't advanced as we are," the old woman said. So that is the end of part 1. Make sure you guys fill out the chart on the methods of characterization, and please make sure that you complete your exit ticket.